Feel like I'm with the teens again. Yeah, he has integrity. Was somebody speaking back here? He's still faithful to his God. Puts God's law first. He's very steadfast. We got mics and people are they're talking way too fast. So if you're online, my apologies.
He wasn't ashamed to put his faith out there.
Ooh, he wasn't ashamed to put his faith out there. I like that, John.
He said that he was trustworthy and there was no corruption in him. That describes his character quite well.
Yeah, he was trustworthy and there's no corruption in him. And we're going to get to that in a second and dissect that. So consider verse 3 with regards to Daniel's attitude. Now Daniel so distinguished himself among the administrators and the satraps by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the whole earth. So he distinguished himself. How did he distinguish his... I'll get this out. How did he distinguish himself to his peers? What did he use? Open book test right there at the end of verse 3. I heard somebody say it. His exceptional qualities. Right? He distinguished himself by his exceptional qualities, so much so, and that's my words, that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. Now think about this, and I think we can draw some inferences here, and this is one of them. Think about your own workplace, or if you're retired when you used to work. Think about that from the standpoint of this. Did you like working with people that complained all the time? Or do you like working with people that complain all the time? Do you like being around people that all they do, they just grumble and they have a bad attitude and you just like, oh, I know this person is going to be there, but I don't want to be around them. Think of the workplace from this standpoint. Do people with terrible attitudes, are they the ones that get promoted? I mean, sometimes they do, but typically, no. They don't. Okay? And so you got to think of this with regards to Daniel and his attitude, and this is the inference I think we can make here, just from a present day analysis, is that if we have poor attitudes, especially in the workplace, we know what happens. You don't move up very fast, and you might even say, hey, here's your pink slip, buddy. You go find a job somewhere else. Okay? But Daniel distinguishes himself because of his exceptional qualities. And so he so much so that the king is looking at him and saying, hey, you're going to be like number one, just below me. So we see that Daniel's attitude is one, he has an exceptional character. We see that, and he has a great attitude. If he didn't have a great attitude, then he wouldn't move up the ranks, right? Okay, the next thing, faithfulness. Now, when you think of faithfulness, it's easy to think of faithfulness from the standpoint of what is our faithfulness to God or what is God's faithfulness to us. Maybe in the context of marriage, what is faithfulness in the context of marriage? But I want us to think about this, and this may be a stretch, but I want us to think about faithfulness with regards to the workplace. What does the text tell us about Daniel's faithfulness with regards to his line of work? No negligence or corruption. What else does it tell us? Or what are some things that we can pull out of the text here? Say that again. No fault was found in him.
The ESV says no complaint was found in him or any fault. And
Nope.
I like the idea of complaint with what you were saying.
Yeah, no complaint or fault was found in him. Okay, he was faithful in all. So there again, think of verse 3. He distinguished himself among the administrators by his exceptional qualities. And then we get into verse 4 with regard to his faithfulness. At this, the administrators and the satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his what? In his conduct of government affairs. Were they able to do that? No, they weren't. So here in this story, what we see here is Daniel's counterparts, the other two men, and the other 120 satraps are jealous of Daniel. And they don't like the fact that all of a sudden he's going to be elevated to a position over all of them, a much higher position. And so what they do, they try to go and find grounds to get him fired, to have him removed, or whatever it is. And there at the end of that first sentence in verse 4, and his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. His work ethic and his quality of work was impeccable. He didn't cut corners. He didn't try to rush through things. He did a great job with whatever was set before him. He was dependable. He could be counted on. The king knew that, hey, if I give this to Daniel, I can walk away and not worry about it because it's going to be done. And more than likely, it'll probably be done better than what I was going to do. Is there truth to that from this standpoint? Maybe you've been in management and you've been able to go to somebody and say, hey, I need you to do this, and you could walk away and knew that it was going to be done well. And when that happens, I mean, that's a person that's worth gold in the workplace, isn't it? To know that, hey, this is going to get done and I can walk away from it and focus my energies over here. That's important. So his faithfulness in the workplace was impeccable. The next one, personal conduct, his own personal purity. What does the text tell us about his own personal conduct, his own purity?
Sometimes in government you hear of corruption, so he was not corrupted.
Okay, all right. Sometimes in government there's corruption, and through that you can become corrupted, but there is no corruption in Daniel. What else does it tell us there? John.
If you're trying to move us forward, it says that they won't find it in his workplace, but they will as it relates to his relationship with God because of the purity of his dedication to the prayers that he had for him. Just a little further, one verse down.
We're going to get to that. And that's absolutely true. And so part of the discussion here is knowing that you might have insights for the rest of us to share that I didn't think of. And I think that's absolutely true with regard to Daniel's prayer life. And we're going to talk about his relationship with God and everything here in a moment. But they even have to go a step farther in terms of trying to find misconduct within Daniel. So they go to his relationship with God eventually. Think of the end of verse 4. Now, when you think of verse 4 as a whole, it's easy to put them together, but you can also separate them. So at this, they get jealous. At this, the administrators and the satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. Okay? And so then, if you jump down, skip that last sentence there in verse 4, and keep this phrase in mind at verse 5. Finally, these men said, we will never find any basis for charges against this man. And so it's easy to think like, okay, they're trying to find something that he did wrong in his job. What is it that he did? Did he cut any corners? Did he cheat? Did he fudge the numbers? Did he do anything that we can go to the king and say, look, he's untrustworthy here? And so then the next step is maybe they look at his personal life. What does he do in his personal life? Is he doing anything there in his personal life? And here I think of politicians, right? The catchphrase when it comes to people that are wanting to run for political office, all of a sudden a deep dive is done on their entire history to see if there's any skeletons in the closet. Well, why do people do that? Well, the opponent wants to win, for one, and two, the voter wants to know, hey, is this person trustworthy? My friend's father back in Mississippi ran for state representative in the state of Mississippi. Great man. Great character. And so that's what his opponent did to him. Come to find out, he had made a mistake on his IRS tax returns. When he found out about it, he went and corrected it immediately, but that's what sunk his what do you call it, campaign for public office. Because then people will say, well, if he fudged there, if he made that kind of mistake, what other mistakes will he make in the future, right? And so that's kind of what I think of that these men, these other two administrators and the 120 satraps are doing to Daniel. Now, okay, there's nothing wrong in terms of his work. What about his personal life? And there we can look at the end of verse 4. They could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. And that sentence can tie to his work, his work ethic and everything within the job place, if you will. And then I think that also applies to his own personal life. They can't find anything wrong with Daniel, so much so that they finally get down to verse 5. They can't find any basis for charges against this man, Daniel, unless it has something to do with the law of his God. And we know that God's law is perfect, so they're not going to find anything there. Right? And so they concoct this plan, and you see that in verse 6, 7, 8, and 9. So the administrators and the satraps went as a group to the king and said, O King Darius, live forever. The royal administrators, prefects, satraps, and on, and they concoct this plan to say that for the next 30 days, Darius, everybody has to pray to you. And if they don't, then there's punishment. They got to be thrown into the lion's den. And this is a law that once you put it in writing and you seal it, it's the law of the Medes and Persians, and it's irrevocable. Even you, O king, can't break this law. And I get the sense that maybe Darius has a little streak of narcissism in him. And so he's like, I like that idea. I can go with that. People praying to me, people worshiping me, I like that. But I want us to pause here and think of Daniel's opponents. Remember earlier we said that this is a narrative of court conflict between Darius and the law of the Medes and Persians and God in his, I should do it like this, God's perfect law and Darius and the Medes and the Persians and their law. So now we get down, it's still that court conflict, but it's between Daniel and his opponents, the administrators and the satraps. So think of this. What is the attitude of the other administrators and satraps? I'm not even going to try and say that word. Satrapies. I feel like we're in a circus and we're going to see trapeze artists here in a second. What's their attitude? What do you think their attitude is? I don't know that there's a wrong answer here, but what do you think their attitude is? Selfish. I'm hearing mumblings. Envious. Anybody else? Yes, no, maybe? Did I hear naive? Is that what I heard? Conniving. That's a good word. That's a big word. Greed. Greedy. Has anybody ever tried to learn a new language? Besides Veronica and Bud over here. That was a dumb question. Take them out of the equation. Actually, I'm glad you guys are in here because you can add credibility to my statement that I'm about to make. When learning a new language, whatever it is, whether it's English or Spanish or Romanian or Greek, Hebrew, Aramaic, whatever, there's some words that just don't translate into the other language. Is that true? Okay, so synonyms or maybe context clues. Just out of curiosity, what word or concept from Romania, and you may not be able to describe this for us, maybe doesn't translate well into English? I'm putting you on the spot. If you can't think of anything, that's fine.
There are quite a few words up there. You cannot pretty much, you gotta look to the context in English and you gotta choose the right word to make sense within that context.
Okay.
But we have quite a few.
Do you,
I don't have enough.
do you want to stand up here and teach? Because that is perfect. That's exactly what I needed. Right? You have to look at context clues. So one of the things that is interesting here, Daniel chapter 1 through about chapter 2 verse 3 was written in Hebrew. And then from chapter 2 verse 4 through the end of chapter 7, it's all written in Aramaic. And I don't know if that's a result of them being in Babylon and learning Aramaic and all that stuff. And then the end of it is back to Hebrew. So in this verse 6, so the administrators and the satraps went as a group. That's the phrase I want us to focus on here in a second. To the king and said, "O King Darius, live forever." Okay? So there's some nuances in Aramaic that don't translate here in English very well. And so the Aramaic verb went as a group. I was going to put the actual word, but it just looked like squiggly lines, not to be disingenuous of them. But so went as a group. And it's ambiguous as to their attitude. The word has a semantic range that moves from the rather innocent connotation of in company to the idea of conspiracy to the notion of rage. Right? So if you think about this Aramaic verb, went as a group, well, we could go as a group and go talk to Wes or go talk to Brock or whoever in this room, and we could just go talk and have a nice chat, and we just went as a group. You with me? Or there's the other connotation here where maybe we're conspiring for deceit or to connive or whatever it is to bring about destruction on a person or an individual or an entity, something like that, or the notion of rage. And when it comes to the notion of rage there, I think of like a mob that's angry, and they are coming with a lot of anger, and they are ready to act, and they will act. Okay? And so when you think of that range of what that word can mean, or that verb, that phrase, when as a group, think of the administrators and all the satraps. What's their attitude? And this is where you have to look at the context. When you look at the context, you know they're not just coming to the king to have a chat and to say, "Hey, king, old buddy, how are you?" They're not doing that. They're coming with conspiracy. And maybe with even an underlying current of rage, because their selfishness and their greed has so clouded their minds that all they want is for Daniel to be gone. So much so that the punishment is death. The verb in combination with the preposition here can also be interpreted in different senses from the point of view of the king himself, who thinks they are making a fuss over him, or from the vantage point of the conspirators themselves who are actually working against him. Again, context clues. Are they making a fuss over the king and saying, "Oh, king, you are so great and wonderful. We just love you. You're the best"? Or are they working against the king? Probably both. Yeah, if they're appealing to his narcissistic streak, absolutely. But we also know that they're using the king against himself in order to get to Daniel. And so when you dive into verse 6 and understand the language here and the nuances of the Aramaic that's being used, this paints a completely different picture of the administrators and the satraps. Especially when you do that court conflict between Daniel and now the administrators and the satraps. And you look at their attitude and their faithfulness and their personal conduct. What about Daniel's walk with God? This is where John was kind of going to earlier. What about Daniel's walk with God? What does the text tell us about his walk with God? They all knew. They said the only way we're going to get this guy is if we make up something with regard to God's law. What else does the text tell us? Yes, he prayed 3 times a day. Not just on the day that he finds out there in verse 10. Now when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened toward Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed. Now that's not a period right there in my Bible, it's a comma. But if it were a period, then it would make it sound like, oh man, Daniel is in big trouble, and so he's going to God in prayer asking for help, which we see that at the end of verse 11. Daniel praying and asking God for help, right? So we can say, well, Daniel, all of a sudden he's in hot water, and now he's going to God and praying 3 times a day. But that's not what the text tells us. So if you go beyond that comma, just as he had done before. And Wes is right. They all knew about it. Look at verse 13. Then they said to the king, Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, O king, or to the decree you put in writing. He still prays 3 times a day. He still prays. So it's something that he was doing beforehand, and that's how they trapped him. And now he's faced with this decree. Okay, if I keep praying, then more than likely I am going to be given to the lions. Or I can maybe pray in private or whatever. I don't know what Daniel's thinking is. I can make a pretty good guess that he's pretty calm, cool, and collected guy because of his relationship with God and that consistency that he has in his prayer life. I wonder if before he finds out about this decree, if you were to do an EKG and look at his heart rate, it's probably just like right here, just real calm, cool, and collected. And then he finds out, hey, if you don't pray to Darius and you pray to someone else, then you're going to die in the lion's den. He probably just went to his upper room and his EKG is just cool, calm, collected, and he's like, I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing. Richard.
I think that's one thing that's notable about Daniel is from the time he was a boy or a prince, he rose to the top in Nebuchadnezzar's court, he rose to the top in Belshazzar's court, and he rises to the top in Darius's court. So there's a consistency in this guy from the time he's a young man till now he's an old man. And so he has a reputation for how he got to where he has been. He's not a stranger to politics and how guys do things, and that's why he has such a notable character about him. Integrity.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another parallel here is Daniel chapter 3, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Daniel's not in that story. But if you think about that, I'll read this here. While the story of the 3 friends of Daniel in the fiery furnace shows how the faithful refused to participate in idolatrous religious practices, here in chapter 6, you see that Daniel refuses to refrain from the proper worship of God. Daniel wasn't present, at least we don't think so, in Daniel chapter 3, fiery furnace, but now he's present here, and he already knows. And I love, just turn over to Daniel chapter 3. This is like the favorite part of Daniel for me, and then also the end of chapter 6. There in verse 16 of chapter 3. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to save us from it, and he will rescue us from your hand, O king. And then, this is the cool part for me. But even if he does not, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. And I think of Daniel in chapter 6, and he's saying, you know what? I'm going to continue what I've done all my life, and I'm going to go and I'm going to go pray 3 times a day like I've always done, and God is going to take care of me. And I don't know if Daniel's in the upper room. The text doesn't tell us in the upper room of his home, and he's saying, you know, God, you're in control. I don't know what's going to happen. You may save me and you may not, but I'm going to continue to pray to you. I will not pray to Darius. Talk about integrity. Talk about integrity, especially with regard to his relationship with God. I showed this at the beginning, and consider, except for the adherence word, consider the capitalized, all caps words, incorruptibility, soundness, completeness. I don't know about you, but when I look through Daniel chapter 6, verses 1 through 16, that's exactly what I see when it comes to Daniel. That's integrity. In all aspects of his life, he lived in such a way that he was not corrupt nor negligent in the workplace, at home, or in his relationship with God. And that's all I have.